I've already had one question about the APYs, if you don't mind discussing, because I'm pretty curious. Does this concept apply to Big Time at all? Because, like you said, you don't have to invest anything. You can just play the game itself, and NFTs are like this bonus. Does the concept of APY apply to the game, and what will it be?
BigTime is a MMORPG for PCs. Players can roam an open world and drop into procedurally generated dungeons to pick up droppable loot. And some of those loot are cosmetic NFTs. They can either use them to individualize their characters or they can sell them on our marketplace.
Sounds awesome. The topic for today is play to earn economies, economic problems of the play to earn games. And the biggest problem is this Ponzi like of the most play to earn games, where the games are super dependent on constant user base growth. And when there is no user base growth, there is no one to sell new NFTs to, and it all collapses. Can you please elaborate on how Big Time is solving this issue, how you're approaching this?
Great question. One of the hardest challenges at Big Time with our economy is what to do with the token. Do we want this token to function similar to how AXS or SLP was in Axie Infinity? Did we want to do it tied to governance? Because that was a model that people liked. And as Big Time has been in development for the last 2.5 years, the dominant narrative in 2021 was find something like Axie and do it again because it was making money hand over fist for a lot of people. It's been very challenging in the last couple months, as everybody knows, with the crypto market, and especially when you don't have a large influx of new players, it puts a lot of stress inside of the economy. I think in the Bloomberg article, they referred to it as a sleeping giant, or excuse me, a sleeping dragon, where once coins hit a certain price, people want to extract. So what we opted for more in Big Time was something that functions more like a traditional currency in a Web2 game, where it really is meant to stay inside of the game. There is no IDO, there is no IDC, there is no tie to governance. Its greatest use is inside of the game. You can still withdraw it out of the game, but it is the fundamental way of upgrading NFTs. That way, kind of making sure that it's best used inside of a game has been one of the hardest challenges, but ultimately what we think is key to making sure we create a stable economy.
What will be the mechanics of keeping the people in?
We definitely put an emphasis on the overall game, and calling ourselves a game first and how we identify ourselves has been absolutely critical to the way we do things. Generally, on the margin, if we make a decision, is it going to kind of increase extraction value out of it, or is it going to create a more enjoyable experience? We opt for the latter. And when you add that in aggregate, it means that we've generally built a game with a much, much, much bigger focus on fun and enjoyment. I don't think that creating a fun game is especially profound concept that we're going after. In some ways, I would argue that what we're going back to is something that everybody kind of grew up with, which is, oh, I'm playing a game because it's fun and enjoyable. And it was only relatively recently that value extraction out of the game became the reason why people played games. And so in some ways, we're returning to concepts that we know have worked for decades.
Casual players, they have this image that play to earn games, or like any blockchain game, crypto game, is like Ponzi, is just there to like get money out of you. Like, you have to understand what it is to play it. Do you think it's a challenge to change this perspective?
I would say on a personal level, it's been probably the biggest challenge I've had while doing marketing and outreach for Big Time is really engaging with Web2 gamers and being like, hey, these NFTs are not necessarily a bad thing, because almost by mentioning NFTs, you lose a big chunk of that audience. Unfortunately, most people who are not super tied in with Web3 believe that NFTs are just JPEG images or some sort of art, and that's definitely not the case. Especially with the utility that people tie into NFTs, especially inside of games, where it almost makes sense that these items should be on chain, particularly things like cosmetics or your character or whatever you want it to be. There's so many advantages to blockchain, but it's a challenge for us to convince people that it's safe and it enhances their gaming experience as opposed to detracts from it.
Like a triple A game, like Fortnite, or maybe it would be Big Time, who will just show that NFTs are not equal to like scam, losing money, and like something silly.
I think that's a pretty wise way of viewing it. there's certain things that are very important to gamers and there's certain things that aren't. And I think ownership and things like data are not core to a gamer's identity and what they look for in a game. But there are a lot of advantages to it. That definition of ownership is changed because it used to be that if you bought a game, you had everything that could ever come inside of the game. That was kind of more of an initial console rollout. Then it kind of evolved to where you could buy the game or then you could buy more assets inside of the game in a modular type way. But now with games getting more powerful, the transition from Web 2 to Web 3, and with this kind of far off goal in the distance of the metaverse, you're looking for things like interoperability and being able to move assets or capabilities between games. And the foundation for that is built on something, some sort of technology. And the way we have to do that right now is through blockchain. And so that's a big reason of why we use NFTs inside of Big Time. Big Time definitely launched as a studios first with Big Time as the flagship. We don't have anything on a roadmap right now, and a big part of that is acknowledging the current market conditions. We need to make Big Time successful, and so in some ways we kind of rolled some stuff back into Big Time to make sure that we could put maximum developmental and engineering energy into it. Because ultimately, if Big Time isn't kind of successful with its early launch, then all of our future expansions or partnerships will generally kind of fall by the wayside. Which is why we've been pretty prudent with the release of early access taking a little bit longer, I think, than some people expected. The idea in the future is yes, we come out with more games and there is some form of interoperability between the environments. I mean, the goal of like interoperability is beautiful, but the engineer part of me gets very sad because it's like that is a brutal amount of work that's going to have to go into making your NFTs work across a variety of platforms and likely, but those games are built on different engines too. And all of that to say, kids stay in school because we're going to need somebody to build this stuff eventually.
I've already had one question about the APYs, if you don't mind discussing, because I'm pretty curious. Does this concept apply to Big Time at all? Because, like you said, you don't have to invest anything. You can just play the game itself, and NFTs are like this bonus. Does the concept of APY apply to the game, and what will it be?
Bottom line is, Big Time is going to be a game first, and I don't think we'll ever release something like what an an APY looks like inside of Big Time. I think when people have asked these questions, it generally comes from two different places. You have early access players, and then you have future free to play players. And a lot of the early access players spent a lot of money on early access passes. Some of them were thousands of dollars. And so, generally speaking, a lot of them were trying to recoup their value on it, which is fair. They paid a lot for a game, and then they wanted to be able to buy and sell NFTs that they find inside the game to recoup their value. And many of them, if they were grinding very hard, they were able to do that. And so the best anecdotes we had were from people who did that. And it obviously kind of varied by person and at what point they bought into those early access passes. Um, and I kind of defer to what those anecdotal numbers were. That's pretty different than what it's going to look like inside of global access, because when global access happens, it's free to play players playing who probably don't give a hoot about any crypto wallets or anything like that, but they also bring in a ton of demand. That's what's unique, is that we know on average in MMOs about 40% of players spend some money on cosmetics. There is a demand out there. They bring a ton of demand, whereas the overall supply of NFTs, that rate goes way, way, way lower. So if you're an early access player, you're going to have a much higher supply of NFTs that you kind of have at your disposal for selling to this massive influx of players who are coming into the game. So, and when people ask about APY, a lot of that will be dictated by how many users end up playing Big Time.
I think if you do the onboarding right and make create your wallet seamlessly and easily, it can definitely like integrate millions of players to crypto, just like even without them noticing that it's crypto.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was very interesting about this Bloomberg article that came out a couple weeks ago about Axie Infinity was the concept of the sleeping dragons. And so for people who aren't familiar with it, is it's basically saying that People bought into AXS or other NFTs inside the game at certain price points. And just whenever AXS or those NFTs get back up to a certain price and start rising again, those people sell out to make their money back because they're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to ride again. So it constantly puts this ceiling on where these prices can rise again. And it's been very, very challenging because so many people are like ready to leave Axie, or they're trying to extract their value out of it because they went into it purely as a business as opposed to a game. But it's been very challenging here, especially as crypto markets have, been hurt, that people are trying to get liquid in order to pay off other things. So for us, entering a little bit late has been an advantage. But again, it goes back to, well, if the main utility for that item was for some sort of in-game capability or reason, then that it's going to take a lot of that sleeping dragon concept away from you, which is overall going to lead to kind of more of a positive user experience and then perception of how the game is going as well.
I love this concept. I think it applies to all the crypto and like even all the finances. You have to understand that all the people want to make profit, but they see it purely as a financial instrument, not as a game. And to me, that's what we don't want to be. Of course, like I mean, we're not wearing like pink glasses. We understand that economy is first. Economy is important. It's super important. It has to be stable. Otherwise, nothing is going to work. But when you go to like to the actual Reddit and you read hundreds of threads of people who are just writing that they're tired of playing the game, they want to get the profit. It's so like boring, but I still play it. It's so disappointing seeing the game not being the game and being actually the opposite of what it's supposed to be.
When I was buying land, I wasn't actually doing the math in my head for like all the different lands that I have. I got every tier of land. So let's say if I have a land, let's say like exotic medium, I think that's like 7, and I got another land that's 3. Will I still be able? How would that play out if I want to put like a forge and it's like a half a half? Cause like let's say if it's a half legendary with 2 spaces and the other half is exotic, which is 3 spaces. How would that play out for the NFT that it would make?
I think I'm having a hard time kind of conceptualizing it, but basically your forge would go inside of each level of space. So if you put one inside of a legendary, you wouldn't be able to put it in the exalted one. But it kind of goes back to that recipe. The rarity is one component of it. When we talk about the level of that cosmetic that comes out of it, but in reality, it's leveling is kind of a more of an appropriate term. Or like level 1 is rare, but it has these kind of capabilities that come with it. And then, for example, a level 10 of that skin has a different set of capabilities and appearance that comes with it as well. So it's more than just the rarity part of it. I know we've talked in these AMAs that rarity is essentially the metric we've been using for on it, but that's just because we haven't released all the details yet. But what you're generally talking about, it's going to be tied to the rarity of your space
No,
tier of
no,
that app.
no. What I'm asking is what I'm trying to say is let's say if you have a half and a half of a land, cause you could connect it. So let's say if I connect my land, but let's say I got a leftover space from exotic and large, which would be like 2 space. I got 2 sockets left for my legendary land. I got 3 sockets left for my exotic land. Well, I have to buy the same exact land to make it 5, or will I be able to still put a forge if I combine them?
Okay, you finally got me. You stumped me. I'm actually not sure on that one. I'm gonna have to go ask the developers on what that looks like. I think I understand what you're talking about because there might be like some leftovers, sockets or something like that. And
Yes, for sure.
okay, yeah,
That would still add up to 5. But
yeah.
so if it added to 5, what tier do it go in? Or what NFT do it make?
I'm not sure. I don't want to give you a wrong answer. I'm actually gonna have to go ask the devs on that one.